you have a very simple setup. That's great.
Yeah, it's just my phone, man.
Awesome.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Writers on Film. This is going to be one of my last, if not my last, report from Cannes, and I'm absolutely delighted to have a critic, fine critic who I've read many, many times, but I've only just met, Bilge Ebiri, who's here with Vulture.
Hello, good to be here.
Thanks so much for joining me, and we're going to talk about some of the big films that I haven't talked about so far. And I'd like to kick off, if I may, with Sean Baker's, is it his second film in competition? I think third film or fourth film at Cannes?
Was Red Rocket in competition?
Red Rocket was in competition.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't here that year, so I think that's... Because Florida Project played Director's Fortnight, I remember that. So yeah, I think it would be his second film in competition.
Yeah, and so what was your take of this film?
I liked it. I like Sean Baker's films in general. He has this kind of loose improvisatory style, but it is, when you look under the hood, it seems the films are doing a lot of interesting things that clearly have been thought out beforehand. This film is, he's made a number of films about sex workers and kind of that world, and this is another one of those. It's about a stripper who meets a young Russian playboy who's the son of some kind of oligarch. We don't really know.
Yeah, it's sort of knowingly left unclear.
Yeah, a lot is left it's a Sean Baker film. A lot of things are left unclear, intentionally so. But he proposes marriage to her after kind of a whirlwind week of partying and sex, and she marries him. And then as soon as his parents find out that their son has married a stripper, the machinery kicks into place to end the marriage. What's fun about the film is it seems at first like it's going to be a really kind of scary, grisly, violent story, because like you see all the goons kind of sort of getting together to come over and drag her out of the house. But actually the goons themselves are not particularly violent. They're just people doing a job, and the whole film is really about it's not, the word I'm looking for isn't solidarity, but kind of the subtle connections between people who labor but aren't necessarily seen as laborers, right? I mean, there's a connection between the stripper and the thugs that are basically there to do a job for this oligarch. In fact, there are thugs doing jobs for thugs who are doing jobs for the oligarch. I mean, there are actual layers and hierarchies and things like that. And as a result, the film is quite fascinating. It's been tipped as kind of a potential Palm winner here. Who knows if it'll win it, but I feel like it could win something. Mikey Madison, the lead actress, is phenomenal. And unknown, I think. I don't think I've seen her.
She had a very small role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as part of the Manson gang, and a bigger role in Scream, one of the latest Scream episodes.
I've seen all the Screams, but anyway, this is a breakthrough role for her. I mean, she's on screen constantly. She's doing all sorts of things. I mean, it requires a tremendous amount of range, and the film, despite being very funny in parts and kind of lighthearted and loosey-goosey in certain ways, ends on a very dramatic, emotional note and an ambiguous note. You don't quite know how to feel about it. But it is interesting how throughout the film there are lots of scenes of strippers gyrating and glimpses of people having sex and things like that. None of them feel at all erotic or or sexy, if you will. I mean, some of it's kind of porny, but not sexy. But then right towards the end, there's one scene, and that is very erotic and also kind of disturbing, and also, kind of sends the film in a whole new direction right before it ends.
Suggesting sort of hidden depths.
Yeah, suggesting hidden depths. I think the film might be a little too long. It is longer than, or maybe kind of exactly the same length of time as 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, it takes place over the course of, well, there's a week-long prelude, but it takes place over the course of a pretty short period of time. And there are certain parts where I thought to myself, I'm not sure where this is going, and I feel like maybe the film itself isn't sure where it's going. But otherwise, I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah, I had a great time with this film as well, and I loved the thing you just said about how there are these hidden connections, because that starts as well with the title itself, because Annie, the stripper played by Mikey Madison, is the Anora of the title, which is her Russian name, although I think there is a lot of discussion in the film about actually where people are from, because they're not like Russians. There's Albanians. There's different nationalities.
Yeah, because the couple of thugs are Armenians. I keep calling them thugs. They're not. I shouldn't call them thugs because they're actually characters in the film, and they're actually very interesting, charming. Charming isn't maybe the word, but
you've gone too far the other way now.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, exactly. They're people doing a job, and they're trying to do the job as well as they can. I mean, they're people who are in the midst of trying to manage a crisis. This father, this oligarch and more importantly, the mom, his wife, is furious about what's happened, and she sees it as their failure to keep an eye on the kid. So it's a huge surprise for them that he's gone and married this person, and it's a real crisis for them because this is a thing. Like they keep saying, I'm gonna get fired. They all feel like they're gonna get fired because of what happened, and they probably are after all is said and done. So really, they're trying to get through this thing without any further screw ups, and you get that sense, and it's so the film has a very different texture than what a brief recap of the story might make you think is going to happen. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask, because I love Sean Baker's work. I've followed him from the very beginning, and I love that this film is such I think he's a cinephile who has a real admiration for a lot of classical Hollywood, and he's certainly into his gonzo Hollywood as well, his cult films and whatnot. And this strikes me as a screwball comedy of sort of 30s pre-code style. It has that zip to it. It has that feisty female centerpiece. And in a way, if you were cynical and calculating, you could look at this film and say, if we tone down the sex work as the explicit depiction of sex work, made it a little bit more Married to the Mob or something a little bit more, this could really be a mainstream movie. And I'm kind of very glad he doesn't do that, but I always wonder if that discussion even happened.
Sean Baker doesn't seem like a person who would have that discussion, but yeah, I mean, it's like, what if Pretty Woman goes off the rails in its 20th minute? It's kind of that's kind of the concept,
good analysis,
right?
Yeah.
And that's what's so great about it, because it starts off with a setup that you're familiar with this setup, right? We've seen things like this before in movies, but then it kind of veers off in a totally different direction. And it's not that it veers off in an unfamiliar direction; it just veers off in a direction that you wouldn't expect from the initial setup. That's what makes it so charming. Again, I keep using words like charming and delightful, and while those are very much true of the film is ultimately a serious film. It's not. It's not a lark, but
that's what I like, is those mixes of the sort of Safdie brothers milieu with this sort of you expect Annie to somehow be, usually this character is pitched in some kind of tragic light, forceful and stubborn and all the rest of it, but ultimately doomed.
Yeah.
And here it's a much more generous, much more open, much more complete picture seems to arrive. Not only of that, but also of the environment around her. Headquarters, the strip club, which she works at, for instance, seems a fully realised place with a whole cast of characters you only glimpse.
Yeah, and I know he did a ton of research for this film. My colleague Rachel Handler wrote an article for Vulture. She interviewed some of the, some of the other actors are actually strippers,
right?
Strippers and actors who've, and they were, Sean Baker and his wife kind of talked with them over the course of development and production, and they used them for research, and then they cast them in the film, and they helped Mikey Madison do her research for the part. So there's a real kind of authenticity there, just because the director actually did the work, and also I think he's a little more familiar with this world than the average filmmaker, not because he's like spending his time in strip clubs, but because he has kind of delved into this world before.
It seems so. I don't want to make everything into metaphor, but it seems like also that might be one of the reasons that he seems to concentrate on this, that it's an extreme form of capitalist exploitation. And that's and also not as exploitation, but also you use what you have to gain a foothold on the world.
It is, and I mean, extreme form of capitalism definitely, but also, those kinds of extremes help clarify our own lives, not just in terms of capitalist exploitation, but also in terms of, how to negotiate the world in general and how to negotiate relationships and things like that. I mean, there's a moment early on when Ivan Vanya, the young man who's I think 21, 22 in the film, 21, he proposes to Annie, and she doesn't believe him at first, and we don't believe him at first, and he's like, no, I'm serious, and she still doesn't really believe him. And there's this little moment where you can tell in her mind she's thinking, is this guy for real? And she accepts it. She, obviously she says she says she'll marry him. And of course, as the audience, we're watching this thinking, well, this isn't going anywhere good. Like, this is clearly not going to turn out well. But the performance is so good and the filmmaking is so on point that you get the sense that she knows this too. She still kind of knows this, but at this point, it's a what have I got to lose type of situation. I mean, there's a great scene towards the end when somebody said, I'm not giving anything away, but they're threatening her. It's like, you lose everything you have, and she doesn't say this, but she's thinking. She's like, I don't have anything to lose. What are you going to take from me? You know? And that kind of stuff just provides so much depth to a character and to a situation, and that's what's so great about Sean Baker's films in general.
Do you think this is his best?
Oh gosh, I really loved the Florida Project, and I really loved Red Rocket. For me, it's those types of assessments happen after I see the films multiple times, and then I can finally decide which one is his best. I think Red Rocket might be my favorite of his films, actually.
Yeah, I think I'm still with Florida Project, but I think every film he's made is, it's up there. He's one of the most consistently interesting American filmmakers at the moment. And
before Tangerine, he had a number of films that weren't necessarily all that well known. They didn't kind of break through in a big way. And a friend of mine, actually, Michael Sergio, who owns a company called Kavu Films, he released a couple of Sean Baker's early films. He's also an actor, and he shows up in this film as the judge at the end.
Really? Yeah. That's a great role.
Yeah.
So
Sean Baker still has some kind of fondness for these guys that he's worked with earlier. Now that he's a big shot, going to Cannes, red carpets and whatnot.
I don't think. I mean, he's definitely. He's definitely arrived when it comes to the European film festival circuit. Florida Project, Willem Dafoe got an Oscar nomination for that, so there is some, noise.
I will say, I mean, Anora could be a kind of a breakout film for him. Neon bought it, right?
I think so, yeah.
Neon bought it. I'm sure they'll give it an awards run. I feel pretty confident that it'll win something tonight. And so this could be one that kind of gets more awards love. But as I was watching it, I thought to myself, Sean Baker is one day going to win Best Picture for the Britney Spears biopic.
You've heard it here first. You've heard it here first. What a wonderful project that would be. Excellent, excellent. So let's move on to another film which showed later on in the competition. Stay the Truth. Anora, I think, showed earlier this week, and it felt like now the competition's really getting going. There's a few, after a slow start, we had some really good pieces of work going out. Anora was one of the first that I really rated highly. But yesterday afternoon, I saw The Seed of the Sacred Fig, which is possibly the masterpiece of the festival.
Well, I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, but I think it's an interesting film. Obviously, Mohammad Rasulov, the Iranian filmmaker who made it, had to flee Iran. There was he'd been in prison already, and then he'd been released from prison, but now, he was again, ordered to be imprisoned and flogged, and he actually he fled the country, and it was while he was making this film that the sentencing came down. I mean, he was making the film largely in secret anyway, because it's a very critical of the regime, obviously. In that sense, I was very impressed with the film, just the fact that it even coheres. Cannes has a history of films like this. Kirill Serebrenikov's films have shown here. Kirill Serebrennikov, who has since, is no longer under house arrest in Russia, but he has a film here as well. But the story that will always resonate with me is in 1982, the Turkish-Kurdish director Yilmaz Güney had a film here called Yol. Now, Güney had spent most of his career, and he'd been an actor in a film. He had been an actor since the 50s and a director starting in the late 60s. He spent most of his career in prison, most of his directing career in prison, and very often he had surrogates who would direct for him. So he's often credited as a writer and a producer and sometimes an editor on his films, and he would write these films in prison. They would sneak out shot lists, they would make the films, he would edit them in prison, he'd briefly come out of prison, and then he'd get convicted of something again, go back. It's a whole story. It's a long story, but he made a film called Yol in the early 80s, again directed by someone else with shot lists and screenplays and direction. In fact, he even fired his initial director from prison and then hired another director. All these people had been his assistants in the past, and the film came to Cannes. Güney fled prison right before that. He showed up at Cannes. He won the Palme d'Or. He shared it with Costa Gavras's Missing. I guess that year they decided they were going to go for a Greek-Turkish friendship kind of situation. And Interpol on his tail shows up, wins the Palme d'Or, and then goes into exile in France. And he died several years after that. But, all this week there was this question of whether Rasulov was going to come here, because he obviously fled his country. And then, of course, he came. He was at his premiere. A couple of his actors were not. And he had pictures of them because they're back in Iran. A lot of people who worked on this film, their passports have been confiscated. They can't leave. Rasulov himself fled. He didn't, get on a plane and leave. He crossed the border into, I believe, Turkey. So there's a great backstory to the making of the film. I think the film is interesting. There are very strong things about it. I think it's a very impressive story, and the way it works in footage of the anti-hijab protests and things like that over the course of the film. I thought all that was really well done. I had some issues with, and this seems very churlish, I thought some of the performances were quite weak and one note, which seems like a terrible thing to say because these poor actors are actually stuck in Iran and unable to leave, and probably in danger themselves. So I'm glad the film exists. I'm glad they made the film. There's certain elements, because it is a very narrative film. It is a film that it's not it's not a film that relies on a ton of style to carry it through. It's a film that seeks to sort of absorb you into its moment. And there are certain elements of the film that didn't quite work for me, but at this point, what are you going to say to the guy? He didn't really have a lot of time. He didn't really have a lot of chances to kind of keep shooting or re-edit it or do reshoots or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I sounds like I liked it much more than you did. My mention of a masterpiece earlier on. I mean, it's the first film for me that had felt weighty.
Interesting.
And
the festival.
At the festival.
Okay.
And I mean, there are films that maybe I enjoyed more, like Anora and The Substance, but I also think this just felt weighty and of the moment. I was talking to David Moraquand earlier, and he was telling me how this had the title of a Cannes winner. That's the sort of colour of pomegranates sort of feel to it.
Taste of cherry.
There you go. Absolutely, the sort of poet.
Well, I mean, that's a very Iranian thing, though, to have titles like that. Anora, remember in the film they talk about how Anora is an Uzbek name, and it comes from, there's the word nur, which is light, and then there's the word nar, which is pomegranate, and it's I think the name kind of incorporates both those meanings. So that one kind of has that too. I think people just don't realize it.
Whereas the guy who she's with is called Igor, and he says it means warrior, and she says it means hunchback weirdo.
That moment between them, where he's like, "It's a good name, it's a good name," and she's like, "No, it's not. It's a hunchback weirdo," and that's a lovely moment in the film. Talking about Anora now. Well, it's an interesting thing that you say that it feels like of the moment. It obviously feels of the moment, and every year at Cannes there are several films that feel of the moment, that speak to a particular moment, and and I think the festival goes out of its way to program films like that, of course, when they're available. I mean, in terms of a masterpiece and a film that has the weight, the film that comes to my mind is Jia Zhangke's Caught by the Tides, which I think is one of his greatest films, and he is one of the great filmmakers of our time. I still have this idea that it could win a Palme d'Or, because I feel like this jury, given who's on it, would recognize, that when you're in the presence of a kind of a masterwork from a filmmaker who is sort of one of the important names of our time, that they might not miss the opportunity to give it something at least. But we'll see. But yeah, Caught by the Tides is in terms of the competition, that I think would be my favorite film in competition.
All right.
And it's a film that he's been making since 2001, I believe. I mean, he shot footage for it back then. He shot footage for it in 2007. He shot footage for it in 2017. Shot footage for it in 2022, and he didn't really know what he was going to do with it. I mean, it was almost like his boyhood, Linklater's boyhood, like that concept. But he didn't quite know where he was going to go with it, and where he goes with it is or how he's put it together. I found incredibly powerful and incredibly moving in terms of following the lives of these two people, and also showing how China has changed over this period, because it's a period of immense change for China. So I'd be curious to see if that film wins anything, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. I still haven't written about that one, but I'm still trying to figure out some way to do so. I will say that something I've noticed in a few of the stronger films at Cannes this year, the incorporation of documentary footage and showing kind of what's going on in the world, because you see that in Caught by the Tides, you see that in Miguel Gomez's Grand Tour, which, by the way, is like very similar to Caught by the Tides in the way it tells the story of two people, and one pursuing the other across a period of time, and across a geography, and the way that it uses documentary footage of the world around it
It has one of the most stunning images I've seen in the whole festival.
Which one?
The Ferris wheel.
Oh,
that's
God, the one that opens with.
It opens, but there's actually a second repetition of that image, which is even more strong.
Is running the Ferris wheel does not have an engine. It's just basically these kids pushing it and just ducking right in time to not get their heads taken off. It's incredible. And so Seed of the Sacred Fig incorporates documentary footage of the protests and the crackdowns in Iran. Caught by the Tides incorporates documentary footage that Jia Zhangka has shot over the course of the last 20 years of the Three Gorges Dam, of COVID, of the preparations for the Olympics, China entering the WTO. I mean, it's a huge period that he's captured in that film. Grand Tour does something similar, although they're not necessarily historical moments that he's capturing. And then the other film that does that is All We Can Imagine Is Light, the Indian film, which also incorporates, it's a film about two nurses in Mumbai, and kind of their lives there. They live together in a small place, and the film constantly cuts to scenes from the street and scenes from around them, so it incorporates documentary footage in that way. So it's something I've noticed, a number of films doing here. I'm sure there are films out, that I haven't seen that do that as well.
An unfinished film, Liu Ye's film, has a whole bunch of sort of COVID-related documentary and shot on iPhone sort of footage.
So and it's it speaks to filmmakers trying to engage with the world around them, and in some cases also highlighting their alienation, perhaps, from the world.
Also, our point of view, where more people are filming stuff these days, and more people are, the idea that we're recording things is no longer exotic.
Yeah, it hasn't been exotic for some time. The thing that I think is happening, and I think it's good that it's happening, is I think filmmakers have sort of embraced the sort of patchwork, mixed media quality of this, because I think, and again, this is not necessarily new to 2024. I'm sure it's been a process, but I think for the longest time there was probably some thought in people's heads, well, this footage was shot on this and that footage was shot on that, and there's no way I can reconcile the two. And I think we've all become, I think maybe the mainstream has accepted this. Is like, you don't need to reconcile. It's okay. This can be 8mm. This can be, old, DV cam. This can be iPhone. This can be that. That's a thing that usually experimental filmmakers did, right? That was something that came from the avant-garde, but now it's become very mainstream to do that.
Absolutely. Even The Apprentice this year had the film stock changing from sort of 70s to 80s bleeding videos, sort of where the colors are all over the place.
These used to be high-level formalist things that filmmakers did, and now everybody does it.
It's a filter on Instagram.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So it's funny, because I do think that that's something that sometimes festivals like Cannes have to wrestle with. Everybody has to wrestle with it, but the idea that the things that visual culture becomes so much more sophisticated, that the things that we once thought were sophisticated now are kind of commonplace and cliche and even kind of annoying. And you have to kind of keep up with the times, but then sort of, what does that mean? Because there's also something to be said for sort of the old school virtues of filmmaking, that's a film. There's a film here. It's not a great movie. It's very good in its first half, and then it kind of fell apart for me. But it's called The Girl with the Needle, which
the Danish film,
yeah. But it is so well put together. It's shot in black and white. It looks fantastic. The editing is very precise. The acting is really good. It's such a kind of, I don't want to say conventional, because that's not the word I want to use, but it has a sort of old-fashioned quality to it. And usually Cannes would be the place where you'd go to see films like that, and this one feels like a total outlier, right? That's the movie that feels like an outlier, the sort of the narrative that just kind of just does it and does it as well as it can.
Tells its story of a beginning and middle and end.
Yeah,
and
exactly,
all that.
exactly. Even, I just said, the Mohammed Rasulullah film has a more kind of conventional sort of shape, but actually it doesn't. It goes in a very strange direction at the end. I mean, it's not a short film, and it kind of meanders, I think, in an interesting way that sort of introduces myth into it.
I'd like to say I think there's like 4 films, and this is what I liked about the film. I thought a lesser film would have been quite happy to have told one film story,
right.
So basically there's a family. The father has just got a promotion, so he's become an investigating judge as the regime is going into a moment of crisis as all the protests are launched. His daughters don't know about his job, and he has to have a gun for his own protection, and the gun goes missing, and that's sort of basically the setup. But the first half of the film feels very much like a slightly claustrophobic family drama within the apartment of this quite well-to-do middle-class Iranian family. Then it becomes something of a chase movie almost. It's actually a car chase, which is not something you usually see in Iranian cinema, I don't think. And then towards the end, it almost goes into a sort of satirical allegory with the family standing for the whole Iranian regime, which does mean you can have criticisms of how disjointed the story can be. Some of those transitions are not seamless. But I kind of liked the fact that this was an animal that was changing and was happy to include all of these things, almost as if looking at the present situation, just one way of telling the story is not going to be good enough.
Yeah, no, I liked the way it changed. I mean, that was one of the elements that I found fascinating about the film, and I thought he handled that quite well. It was more sort of the more conventional virtues that didn't quite work for me, but whatever. It's
one of the stunning shots I'd just like to point out as well was there's an amazing shot of a woman cleaning the wounds of another woman's face, which is a 2-minute shot, I think, and again it's like, how do we bring home this situation, the consequences of state power, and this was done in a way that was really moving, and we've seen the found footage, we've seen the things that are actually happening, and this wasn't actually happening. This was fiction, and it was makeup, and it was good makeup, but it was a wonderful shot, wonderfully conceived, and it really made its point.
Yeah, and it is at that point because it's buckshot that she's cleaning out, right? I mean,
well, you kind of, as a viewer, you don't even know until she's
and
sort of picking things out.
Yeah, and then she sort of empties them into the sink, and then you realize what she's been, and it's just the monstrosity of the thing just hits you. An 18-year-old girl gets shot in the face. I mean, what can possibly be the justification for such an action? Act of brutality. Yeah, and that's one thing that the film did really well, because films, even films that you see at a place like Cannes, they run on escalation, right? You have to escalate everything. I mean, this is the thing that Hollywood executives always thought, how does it escalate? How do we raise the stakes? So people have to die in movies for us to care for them. I mean, almost. And there's a scene where somebody's been shot. They've been shot with buckshot, and it's this long scene, as you said, long shot of them cleaning out these things from her face, and it gets so kind of it becomes almost abstract in that moment, and but then somebody says, I think it's right after that, they say, this beautiful 18-year-old girl has been shot in the face, like, what's her life going to be like? And that's such an interesting reversal, because it's like, in the grand scheme of things that happen to you in movies, this wouldn't qualify, I mean, Furiosa, everybody's shot multiple times.
And an arm is ripped off, and it's just like, that's just how she got that arm.
Good, she got away, but then, films like these kind of really bring home, like, something like that. This is a trauma that this person will carry forever, and, that scar will be both emotionally and physically with them forever.
The longevity of trauma.
Yeah.
It reminds me, it's a totally different film, but it reminds me of a small excerpt of dialogue in Seven, in which Brad Pitt talks about someone getting shot in the arm, and dying.
Yeah.
And you just never think about someone being shot in the arm and dying. It's like you're shot in the chest or the head and you die.
It's one of those things. I mean, films. I mean, because of the nature of films and because of the fact that they're all kind of competing for our attention, they escalate things like that. And it's nice sometimes to have films that remind you, this is the worst thing that's going to happen to this person. You know.
And even things which are non-fatal can be devastating, and can be, there's a weird thing about films that sort of drinking whiskey and being shot look weirdly pleasant. There's a weird, being shot in.
William Holden made this stuff way too cool for us,
Right? Sam Peckinpah made, flying through the air with bullets flying through you look almost fun.
Yeah. So it's I mean, it's always nice. I mean, that's kind of the thing about humanism. Like those kinds of things, really. I mean, it's nice when films sort of bring you back to the human level like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking of which, I think the aeroplane that is heading overhead is telling us we've gone over our time. But that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to me, Bilger.
Thank you. That was great. I really enjoyed this.
So